Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is Sara Levite, and she is going to be talking about how to overcome emotional eating. Please welcome her to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really grateful to be part of this incredible bundle. So my contribution to the bundle is an audio guide about how to overcome emotional eating. And the reason why I wanted to create this guide is because as in my work as a psychotherapist and a wellness coach, I find that a lot of times people really don't understand the distinction between physical and emotional hunger. So what I did in this guide is I'm doing a deeper dive into defining what is physical hunger, what is emotional hunger, what are some of the emotions that people typically eat over, what are some of the other ways that they can get those emotional needs met. And so it's really an opportunity for people to acquire some tools so that they can pivot away from overeating for emotional reasons and try to get more connected to the physical needs of their body and, okay, address the emotional needs in a way that will actually work. Because if you eat for emotional reasons, it doesn't solve the underlying issue. It doesn't give you the tools that you need in order to be able to manage emotional discomfort. So this guide is an attempt to help people to do that.
Right. Thank you. Well, people, do people really eat for emotional reasons, or do they eat hyperpalatable junk food for emotional reasons? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I mean, certainly there are two different kinds of overeating. There's the overeating because it just tastes so darn good and you can't stop. And then there's the overeating because you're really trying to self-medicate. Now, you and I both know that highly processed food tends to be the kind of food that numbs us and makes us feel a little bit delirious. And so that tends to be the food that people overeat on when they're trying to get emotional comfort. But I feel as though there's definitely a problem about the kind of food that people are overeating on. People don't tend to overeat on things that are plant-based. They don't tend to overeat broccoli or brown rice. It just isn't the tendency. It's more the foods that actually alter the brain chemistry and serve to be a bit of a tranquilizer or a form of medication.
Yeah, because people are agreeing with that, because I always joke that there's nobody attending the Arugula Anonymous
That's right.
meetings, because I don't think those foods give you an appropriate amount of dopamine, but not over the top like the sugars and flours, which are two foods you've been abstinent from, I think, longer than anybody I know.
Well, 32 years. So I don't know what the longevity is with the other people, but I've been really fortunate in that I haven't had that in my food plan for over 32 years. So that's terrific. And so what that did is it enabled me to be able to start to really understand on a physical level, what does it mean to be hungry? Because prior to that, when I was binge eating off and on for 10 years, I would just eat kind of a little bit all day long, or else I would fast all day long because I had binged the day before. And by discovering what it is that my body needed physically and what it is that my mind and my soul needed emotionally, I was able to get food into its proper place, which is it's fuel for my body. It's a source of joy. It brings me happiness rather than the hell that I experienced before when I was overeating a lot of junk food. So that's something that I think is really important.
Right. And processed food is designed to overeat. I mean, they remove the fiber and they remove the water. So even if you don't have a binge eating problem, you're going to overeat on it because it's not satiating.
That's right. I mean, how many people can eat a potato chip? How many people can have an Oreo? I mean, it's just, even if you don't have a problem with food, even if you don't have a problem with your weight, those foods are very much designed to become addictive, and the food industry knows what it's doing. I wanted to talk a little bit about the distinction between physical hunger and emotional hunger, if you don't mind.
I
Physical hunger is something that you experience in your body and it dissipates when you eat. So an example of a symptom of physical hunger would be your stomach is growling, you get lightheaded, your body feels shaky, that kind of thing. You get a headache. And if you consume food, those things should dissipate because it's a physical need that you are meeting with food. If it's an emotional need, some of the things that precipitate that are that you're extra stressed in your life, or there's something that you're trying to avoid doing, so you use food as a way to procrastinate. Oftentimes my clients will report that they eat at night, when they're tired in front of the TV. If people live alone, or if they're in a relationship that's not satisfying, then they can try to fulfill their emotional needs with food around that. It could be financial stress that people overeat on. The problem with that is that it doesn't work. It doesn't remedy the underlying problem. And so what I like to do is I like to help people to distinguish physical hunger from emotional hunger, and then equip them with tools so that they can manage the emotional discomfort without trying to turn to food to do that. I was really fortunate in finding a way to do that. And as a result, I lost 40 pounds, and I kept it off for, over 3 decades.
Well, isn't it interesting that your weight loss maintenance occurred the exact same time frame as your abstinence from sugar and flour occurred?
That's right. It's not a coincidence. It's just a magical realization that I was blessed to come to.
Well, also, even if sugar and flour weren't addictive, and maybe for some people they're not, they're still very calorically dense.
They are calorically dense. And frankly, I really love eating volume. I like to eat a lot of food. And boy, do I get a big bang for my buck when I'm eating food that's real, that comes from Mother Nature. I can eat so much food, and I find that to be very satisfying. And yet it doesn't result in my being obsessed with food. And when you eat processed food, it does contribute to an obsessive tendency because your body craves it and your mind craves it. And then that's a big setup, right? Because you may try to abstain from it, but if it's in your environment and your body starts talking to you and you get the sugar craving, it's very difficult not to try to satisfy that with the food. It's very difficult.
Absolutely. It's just so true. And I'm a volume eater too. And I think we were meant to be a volume eater because, I mean, hunter-gatherers, the food was of a much lower caloric density back in the Stone Age and for all the years up until a relatively recent timeline in human history. And it's just wonderful to be able to eat to satiation without having to, weigh and measure your food, because we're eating the right food, plants.
That's right. Exactly. Precisely. And so some of what I talk about in my audio guide, which is in the bundle, is I talk about ways to induce relaxation in the body, ways to manage anxiety. That's also something that people tend to overeat around. Is they're using, like I said before, they use food, generally processed food, as a way to manage their anxiety and tranquilize themselves. So I devote a section of my audio guide to tips for managing anxiety. I think it's really important for people to learn how to calm their central nervous system, regardless of if they're trying to lose weight or not. I mean, we live in a very high stress world, and the pace is very rigorous. And I think that the only way that we can really calm ourselves is to develop tools that work for us. So what works for one person may not work for another. And so I incorporate some of that into the guide. And I also talk a little bit in the guide about ways to rate your stress level, identify what are some of the things in your area, in your life that you're feeling emotional hunger around. It's typically relationships, financial stress, health matters. It could be loneliness. It could be, for some people, it's a housing crisis or feeling like they don't really feel comfortable in their home environment. So and the other thing that I offer is I offer a class. It's a 4-week class. And incidentally, I'd like to offer your viewers a 50% discount for this class. And it's called What Am I Really Hungry For? And it's a 4-week class, and it's virtual. And what we do is I do a more in-depth kind of coaching with people about how to identify what is it that I'm really hungry for. Is it food? Is it physical, or is it some kind of an emotional challenge that I have in my life that I haven't even necessarily defined or clarified, that is really keeping me in that cycle of overeating and eating foods that I don't want to be consuming? And so that's going to start, it's on Saturdays. It's going to start in the beginning of March, and people can go on my website and learn about it. But for your viewers, I am offering a 50% discount. And all they need to do is when they fill in their name, just put Chef AJ after it. It's that simple.
Wow. If you write it up for me, I'll add it to the show notes. That's very generous of you. I'm on your mailing list, and I noticed you're doing some kind of class on Saturday about
Yes.
managing anxiety.
Yes, and that's also a free presentation. And so again, people can go to my website and they can see it there. It's also you can follow me on Instagram, and you can check out you can email me if you want. I mean, all of that information should be in the show notes. And the presentation that I'm offering on Saturday, it's tips for managing anxiety. It's a virtual event. And I give all sorts of ideas that for people who are trying to figure out how can I recalibrate my central nervous system? What are some ways that I can start to decrease the level of anxiety in my body so that I can feel like I can access more joy, energy? We use so much energy in anxiety. It just uses it up. And the other thing that I wanted to say about emotional eating is I like to work with my clients in analyzing and assessing. Imagine if you weren't spending all of that time and energy thinking about weight, thinking about food, thinking about dieting, then that would free up so much energy for you to be doing things in your life that really truly nourish you, because there's nothing more delicious than a healthy body.
Absolutely. Somebody once said to me, they can tell the difference between true hunger and emotional hunger, that true hunger can be satisfied by eating any food with nutrient value, but emotional hunger, you have to have specific food.
Well, and not only that, but you have to have usually one of, if you're eating for emotional reasons, usually one is not enough. And so that's another indicator. So if you're eating when you're not hungry, if you're eating when you know there's you know that you're trying to avoid something, if you're eating during a particularly stressful time in your life and you're trying to mitigate some of that stress by using the food, these are just all red flags that you want to pay attention to. And what I like to do across the board when I'm working with my clients is I like to make sure that they exercise the practice of self-compassion. So self-compassion starts with the way that we talk to ourselves. Oftentimes people think of self-care as being all about taking a hot bath or getting a massage. Those are lovely things. But for me, I feel like the real core essence of self-care is around developing self-compassion so that the way that we talk to ourselves is the way that we would talk to a dear friend or loved one.
Yeah, that's great. Kathy says during the summit, and I think she's referring to the Truth About Weight Loss Summit, which we just had, a lot of presenters said we shouldn't eat for pleasure, just to eat to fuel. I'm having a hard time with with that concept. I really enjoy food. I enjoy good tasting food. I don't think it has to be mutually exclusive. I think you can still have pleasure and enjoy food without indulging in junk food and processed food.
I do too. I also think that eating is your birthright and is a joy. And, I feel like when you have some kind of a physical need, so let's say you're really, really, really thirsty and you get yourself a glass of water. That's like a true joy when you're able to quench your thirst that way. Let's say you're really, really exhausted and you get to lie down on a bed. That's a physical relief to that discomfort. Let's say that you're really, really cold and you get into a nice hot bath. That's a joy because you're placating, you're taking care of a physical discomfort that is, really disturbing. Likewise, when you're hungry and you eat good food, it's a joy, it's a pleasure, and it's something that we get to do multiple times a day. The problem is that a lot of people are so caught up in that cycle of just uh, not, really painful relationship with food and a relationship with eating that is so fraught with tension that they aren't able to really access the joy that comes from it. Sure, the first bite or even thinking about the first bite may be joyful or may give you a little bit of a buzz. But then by the time you've had a few and you're overeating and you're doing it for emotional reasons and it's not even because of physical hunger, and then you add to that it's junk food, you just start to feel really terrible. You start to feel some shame. You start to feel oftentimes bloated. And so it does just the opposite. It makes you feel terrible.
Yeah. Well, it's, like Dr. Furman says, do you live to eat or eat to live?
Right, exactly. And I think that that's, we don't want to have such a lofty goal for people that they feel overwhelmed or intimidated by what we're talking about, because it's a journey, it's a process. It's not as though I put down sugar and flour and then all of a sudden everything was fine and I was only eating for physical hunger. No, it took a long time for me to get in touch with my body, for me to organize my food and identify what food really works for my body, what feels really satiating, what do I enjoy. I do believe that food should be enjoyable. I just think that we should try to separate the enjoyment of eating from trying to mask pain or trying to numb ourselves. And that can take time to cultivate. And I think that people shouldn't necessarily try to do it on their own. They should join a support group or work with a professional or a wellness coach to understand and unravel it, because it's obviously a complicated web that for most people has been in operation for many decades.
You work with people individually in groups?
I work with people individually and in groups. I also specialize in working with couples. And in this particular area about weight loss, I like to work with the spouse of somebody that's trying to manage their weight and just really educate them about food addiction, educate them about body shame, educate them about ways in which they can and cannot be helpful. So often a spouse will really want to support their partner, but they won't necessarily know how to do it. And in turn, they could say the wrong thing, they could do the wrong thing. And so I try to coach people around that. I also am a real proponent of trying to encourage children to eat well. And I wrote a recipe guide. I put together a recipe guide for healthy snacks for children, which is also on my website, because I believe that if you can have children enjoy food and enjoy the nutritional result of eating good food from a young age, it just becomes their habit and they get less swayed into that food industry propaganda. So I'm really encouraging my clients to start their children when they're young and educate them about nutrition and health and wellness, and that food should be joyful. Have your children participate with you in food prep and make sure that there's all sorts of healthy food available to them so that when they're hungry, they see that as being an option instead of something that's in a shiny package.
Yeah, maybe we should start putting broccoli in a shiny package.
Wouldn't that be nice? I think that, for example, when I was raising my kids, I remember we would go to the grocery store, and of course, everything that was geared towards children had cartoon characters on it or whatever, and they would point to something and say, "Mom, I really want that." So what I did is, rather than saying no, I would say, "Well, let's take a look at what's in it." And so we'd start to read the ingredient list together because I wanted them to think in terms of what's in this box. Like literally what is in it, because so often people see the picture and they equate it with a taste, but they don't necessarily know what's in it and what's comprised. And so I started to educate my children from a young age about, if you want something, check out the ingredient list and at least become acquainted with what's actually in there. And if you can't pronounce it, it might not be real food.
Do you think young children, though, care about what's in it?
I think that kids, they know the difference between feeling good and not feeling good, and they also know the difference between feeling like really hyped up and not feeling really hyped up. It's difficult in our world to keep children away from all of the temptations, and I think that there's a danger in trying to be a purist because some children rebel against that. But I also think that if we can expose kids to really healthy food from a young age, then that becomes something that's familiar to them rather than it being something that they don't have on a regular basis. And again, as parents, when you model behavior for children, that has a significant impact on their behavior too. So if you as a parent are trying to make healthy choices, then that will trickle down hopefully to the children.
Yep, I agree. Let's see, Kathy, who's watching live, wrote, food doesn't take away the pain or hurt. It just masks it, takes your mind off, even creates new problems. But somehow eating whole food, plant exclusive, heals the damage the food has done all these years. It's been used as a crutch. It's true that when you eat the food, it may temporarily make you feel better, but over the long run, I think it actually makes people feel worse.
And that doesn't even take into account shame. So many people, when they are eating food that's not really healthy and that's loaded with all sorts of sugar and that kind of thing, so often they feel badly afterward. And then they feel not only physically badly, but they feel guilty. And that guilt can perpetuate the cycle, because when we feel guilty, we beat ourselves up. When we beat ourselves up, we want comfort. And if you're choosing food for comfort, then it gets you back into that loop. So it's a really dangerous cycle, and we live in a culture that isn't very sympathetic to people who are trying to eat well, because the food industry is so powerful and all encompassing.
Yeah, I agree. Do you work a lot with people that have binge eating disorders?
I have, you know, I'm a wellness coach and a licensed psychotherapist, and in my practice, I work with people on a whole wide range of issues, whether it be anxiety, depression, stress management, relationship issues. As I said before, I also have a lot of experience working with couples, and in terms of binge eating, I oftentimes, what I'll do is I'll integrate my wellness coaching with my psychotherapy by doing a real thorough assessment about a person's lifestyle when I'm working with them. So, for example, somebody might come in and they might talk about having terrible anxiety. Well, one of the things that I want to explore with them in the assessment is I want to explore, okay, well, you know, what's your lifestyle like? Are you working all the time? Are you under tremendous financial stress? How much caffeine are you consuming? You know, what's your nutrition like? Are you exercising? So I want to get a holistic view of them so that I know if this is something that's some kind of a mental health condition, or if it's something that can be corrected and remedied through lifestyle changes.
Yeah. And you know what I was thinking? The processed food industry, it's bad enough that the food is horrible. I was thinking about it when I was little. They always put the prize in it. So that even if like maybe you didn't want it for the food, you're going to buy it because you want the prize. And the Cracker Jack, you want the prize. Remember when they used to have prizes in boxes of cereals? And so you had to eat the cereal because the prize was always on the bottom.
Right. And you know, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because in my recipe book for healthy snacks for kids, I have a healthy recipe for Cracker Jacks. And it doesn't have any junk in it. It's healthy, and you can offer it to your kids. And I think it tastes really good. So good that they don't care about if there's a prize or not.
That's great. Well, the health is the prize, but when people are stuck in the throes of the pleasure trap, they don't always see that. Here's a question from a live viewer. Wait, I just saw it about depression. When I'm in depression, I don't eat. How to change that?
Right. Okay. Well, when people are feeling depressed, some people sleep a lot, some people don't sleep, some people, you know, isolate, some people cling on to others. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that depression can play itself out. In terms of appetite, there are some people for whom, when they are depressed, their appetite shuts down and they almost feel nauseous and they're unable to eat. And then there are people, and this I think is more common. I think it's more common, at least it's been in my professional experience working with clients, it's more common for people who are depressed to overeat, because there's food, there's components in the food, and we've talked about this before, it's usually junk food. There's ingredients in it that really impact the dopamine level in the brain. And so that then induces a feeling of happiness or joy, or all is content and good. And then that keeps the cycle going. So for somebody who is depressed and finds that they're having a hard time eating, I would really encourage that person to make sure that what they are eating is a big bang for their buck. So that would be eating things that are, you know, real food, absolutely, 100%, that are calorically dense. So that could be like, you know, nuts and seeds and things like that, avocado. Just make sure that when you do eat, you are getting as much as you can so that you don't then have the issue of losing too much weight. The other thing that people don't really understand is that if somebody is taking psychotropic medication, if they are taking an antidepressant, that medication, you need to have good nutrition in order for the medication to work. It doesn't work as well if you're just giving your body, you know, poor nutrient foods. They work much better if you're making sure that you're getting enough protein, enough fat. And so the healthier your body can be with food, the healthier your body can be with utilizing some of the tools that you might be accessing, whether it's, you know, whether it's holistic alternative treatments, or if it's traditional medication, whatever. Our body functions best when our body is under a low level of stress, when we are in a place of calm and peacefulness, and also when we are giving our body the fuel that is most nutrient dense. And so that would be the things that are closest to Mother Nature. And those are the foods that serve us best. Our body recognizes them. We can digest them most easily. And clearly, when somebody is depressed, it's imperative that they pivot to, okay, I can't manage my mood right now. My mood is really challenged. What are some of the things that I can control and what can I focus on? And so I encourage people like that to make sure that they're moving their body. I also encourage them to make sure that they are eating nutritious food, and also that they are getting the amount of sleep that they need. And most importantly, not to isolate, because when we isolate, we get more and more inside of our own head. And sometimes that's not a very good place to be.
I agree. So Susanna, who's watching live and has 8 kids, says it's hard to do this when they're teens and young adults. I highly recommend doing this when they're younger.
Yes, I agree. And you don't want to get into a power battle, a struggle with children, because you don't want the dinner table to be a place where there's all sorts of tension. You know, different parents do it differently. Some parents, they serve one thing, and it's you. If you're hungry, you'll eat it. If you're not, if you don't want to eat it, then go hungry, whatever. Some parents might have a few varieties of things that people can eat. So it's really dependent on how you like to parent. But I encourage people not to have a lot of tension at the dinner table for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is that then that impairs the ability to digest food well.
Yeah. So when people use the word emotional eating and they use the word food addiction, are they similar? Are they the same?
Well, they can be different, and some people experience both. So you can have somebody that you know, they go through a breakup, or they're feeling they've lost a loved one, or they're struggling with a kind of a physical medical condition, and that they use food to comfort themselves. They may not be a food addict. A food addict is somebody where it takes more and more of the food in order to induce the same effect, and it's a progressive disease. And so for food addicts, it might start that they have, they start, a binge might be like 5 cookies. And then by the time their disease progresses, it could be like there's no amount of cookies that they can't consume. What they do is they consume a lot of cookies, and then they wait until they digest a little bit, and then they want more. So the difference is that a food addict can't, they can't moderate. They need to abstain from certain substances. They can't necessarily moderate that. An emotional eater has much more ability to do that. And when the emotional eater develops ways to manage their emotions and to fulfill themselves emotionally and identify what it is emotionally that's going on with them, then they are able to have a healthier relationship with food and eating. But food addicts, it's trickier, because not only do they have the physical craving and addiction, but they also have a mental kind of obsession that goes along with it. So if I'm dealing with a food addict, or if I'm dealing with somebody that's an emotional eater, first I identify if they struggle with both. And if they don't, then I treat them slightly differently.
Great, thank you. Question. Does Sarah have any suggestions for coping with your emotions during weight loss when dealing with an unclean environment, especially with a very large family, very busy household for me to manage?
What I always encourage people to do, because what that person is talking about is they're talking about trying to feel a sense of control with food in an environment where they live with other people. And so, for example, if that person lived alone in a condominium, they could bring in whatever food they felt they wanted to have there, and they wouldn't be tempted by other foods. But when you live with other people, you have to navigate your way, and there needs to be compromise. So what I always recommend to people is that they make sure that they not get over hungry, because when we are over hungry, we tend to reach for the food that's going to impact us quickest, and that tends to be a processed food. So you want to make sure you don't get over hungry. You want to make sure that you've got the provisions that you need. And so at the very least, you need to sit down with the people that you share the house with, whether they're family members or housemates, and explain that you are trying to eat a particular way, and that you really would appreciate if they made sure that your food was available to you. It's difficult for people when they are living with somebody, or preparing food for other people who are eating, who want food prepared that the person that's trying to lose weight doesn't feel comfortable eating. That's why they need to make sure that they always have the healthy food there, so that they are not tempted to stray. They also always have to make sure that they don't allow themselves to get over hungry. And for a period of time, sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 6 months, they need to make sure that they've got their food organized. So what that could be is they could write down for a week what am I going to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? So that it's predetermined. You're not determining it when you're hungry and you open the fridge and you look at what's there. So one thing that I will recommend to people, and some people find this helpful, some people feel like they're able to do it more easily than others, but the recommendation is that on, let's say, a Sunday, you just write out your food for the week. So for Monday, what am I going to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Tuesday, what am I? That way you can be organized. You can make sure that you have the food that you want. You can batch cook if you're very low on time and you need to make sure that things are prepared in advance. You can batch cook, but you want to make sure that you look at your food as being your medicine, and you want to take it seriously, because um, when you're overweight, when people are obese, it leads to all sorts of medical problems and sometimes can be fatal. And so you have to take it very seriously. If somebody's a food addict, it can really impair their life if it spirals out of control. I know people who have lost jobs because of their food addiction. I know people who have lost relationships because of their food addiction. I know people who have lost their houses because they, weren't able to manage their finances. I mean, this is not an overstatement. These are things that I've observed in working with clients. So it's critical that you consider this to be a serious medical condition for you, and that you prioritize it. And you want to make sure that you always have the food that you need, and you want to make sure that you don't get over hungry, and you want to make sure that you prioritize it and make it your routine. It will take a little while, and I encourage you to seek out support so that you're not doing this alone in a vacuum, especially if you're living with a bunch of people that are not eating the same way. You want to access people online. You want to join a support group. You want to make sure that you've got a buddy system. I know you, Chef AJ, you've got all sorts of opportunities for people to have community around weight loss. And so access this rather than isolating and trying to do it on your own. It doesn't need to be that hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, tell again your bundle offering, and I keep posting your link if people want to buy it.
Thank you. It's an audio guide, and it's a guide for overcoming emotional eating. And I also, you can see, if you go on my website, you'll see that I'm offering a free presentation this Saturday. It's virtual, of course, and it's on tips for managing anxiety. And then in March, I am offering a 4-week class on it's entitled, What Am I Really Hungry For? And it does a deeper dive in working with each participant around what's going on in their life where they may be feeling emotional hunger, and how can they get that need met in a way other than food. I also am offering a workshop, a virtual workshop in March on improving your body image. So people can go and look at that. I also, like I said, I have that recipe book with healthy snacks for children. And if you sign up for my What Am I Hungry For? What Am I Really Hungry For class, just when you put in your name, write Chef AJ after it, and you get 50% off. And it's my pleasure to offer that to your guests.
Right. Have you ever heard the phrase, if hunger isn't the problem, food isn't the solution?
Yes, I've also heard that that if you're a food addict, one is too many and 1,000's not enough.
Yeah, I think that one is from Kay Shepherd, if I'm not mistaken, from her book, and that's
right.
Same thing with alcohol. One is too many, and 1,000 is never enough.
That's right. That's right. And I think that for some people, not everybody, but for some people who struggle with overeating, it's an addiction. Now, look, we live in a culture that's very food obsessed, and we live in a culture where there's an abundance of food that's not real and that is highly addictive. So lots of people overeat, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a food addict. Food addiction is something that's separate from, let's say, the average American. The average American, most Americans can't have one Oreo, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a food addict. So when I'm working with somebody, I try to help them distinguish between what's going on here. Is it that you just are in the habit of overeating, or is it that you are emotionally really just struggling and you don't have the tools and coping mechanisms to manage your emotions, and that once you develop those, then food will become secondary. So it's individual, but I also think that it's important to be honest with yourself and then come forward and be honest with somebody else.
Absolutely. Doug, I want to give a shout out because he's lost 140 pounds and maintaining it. And he says, I'm still a food addict. I nosh all day, but thanks to whole food, plant-based eating and good advice from people like Chef AJ, I eat really low calorie density, healthy things only, but I'm still a food addict. But he's a healthy food addict now.
Yeah. And you know what? I think there's a big difference. And when I'm working with somebody who's a food addict and they're trying to transition away from the junk food, sometimes for a while, you know, they continue to overeat and sometimes even binge, but they're eating real food. And so physiologically, that's impacting them differently than it would be if they were eating off highly processed food with sugar and flour in it. So it's, you know, I work with each client individually. I try to meet them where they're at, and I'm forever trying to support them and give them confidence that they can do this, because I did it. I know from personal experience, I know from professional experience that overeating is something that you can really overcome, and that it's something that you can realize that there's no food that feels better than good health. There's no food that's more delicious than good health. And so it's identifying what does health look like for you, not only physical health, but also emotional health and well-being.
Absolutely. Well, nothing tastes as good as health feels.
Exactly. Exactly.
I saw a comment from Kathy, waiting for our bodies to change and sticking to a plan is hard. That's why having a clean environment and having batch prepped healthy food, that's going to help get you through those difficult times, I think.
And also getting a support system, either a support person, a professional friends, a support group. We can't do this alone.
Yeah. Kathy says, you seem like a very sincere, compassionate person. I agree. And sugar and flour free for 32 years. I was going to say somebody should celebrate and give you a cake. Just a joke. A watermelon cake. Well, thank you so much for participating in the bundle. Is there anything in the bundle that caught your eye that you're interested in?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. There's fitness classes. There's over 1,000 recipes. There's lectures. There's meditation. There's yoga. I mean, it's for people who want to lose weight, but it's for anybody that wants to improve their health. There's so many things in there, and you know, over $4,700 worth of content for $49. I mean, that's nuts. That's really nuts.
I know, it's why it's only for 10 days and it'll never appear again. And it's like 50 cents a product. So yeah, I can't wait to listen to your recording. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Chef AJ. And it's a pleasure, and good luck to everybody on their weight loss journey.
Great. Thank you. And their health journey. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back in about 5 minutes and we'll have one more show with another wonderful bundle contributor who can do everything in a jar, soup and salad and stew. And her name is Tiffany. We'll